the thing again. I think
That's so
the intro
random.
again. I think.
Oh right, okay.
We're live.
Well, it's a weird one, but hello, welcome to Grace Smith Friday live stream with special guest Seth Miranda. First, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. There's a lot of fun last time, so I'm psyched for this one.
Absolutely, and now we're doing a take two from today's live stream as well. So, I'm sure everyone joined us already. Everyone knows who Seth is, but Seth, do tell us what you do, why you're here, yada yada yada.
Well, I'm here because Khan poked me and woke me out of bed to do this. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a pro photographer here in New York. I'm 20 plus years in the game. And you might have seen me on Adorama TV and some other brand channels doing gear reviews, teaching lighting techniques, and going live all the time. And shoot a lot of special effects makeup. So creatures, aliens, bleeding, bloody craziness, and also the pretty stuff for all you civilians. But yeah, so that's pretty much what brings me here.
So if you don't like gruesome stuff, then there's a pretty stuff as well. All right. So for some of you who don't know what we do, we talk photography, etc., etc. Coffee Fund is open if you do like the channel. That supports us really well. Now, also give us a like and subscribe if you haven't done so. It just opens up this live stream to all other people. So people who are just tuning in on YouTube, it may just pop up in their window and they say, "Oh, I know those people. They talk cameras. Let's join us." Okay, so first, what would you like to start with? I had this question from IG, and it's just based on the last week's Nikkei article that Nikon is going to stop DSLRs. How much do you care about this? Are we sure we just put this to rest that is happening? Tell me your opinion.
I mean, I think it's no surprise that the industry is going mirrorless. We've been mirrorless, right? What you guys have to realize is just because something stops doesn't mean it vaporizes. There is 20 something years of DSLRs out there and used and still new on shelf and probably still coming off the line for the next few years. And they're not stopping tomorrow. But development, yeah, I think we're good. We've reached such a point of DSLR that the technology doesn't need a lot of R&D. What you need is R&D in the mirrorless, which is where the majority of the market is going, especially in a hybrid world that needs video. You have to realize that even though something like a D850 is an incredible camera, I mean, I got one somewhere over here, is an incredible camera, but for $1,000 less, I can, in theory, do more out of a Z6 II with photo, video, live. Look at me in a Z6 I. I would never do this on the D850. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of see where the world's going. Also parts, moving parts, the size of the bodies, the amount of material they need, the technology going into it, and they can't support two different types of technology going at the same time during a shortage, all this stuff, right? Like, you guys got to breathe for a second here and just realize we got to kind of go forward a little bit. We're gonna put the
absolutely. A lot of people want to have everything, at the same time. We want to have two systems running side by side. We want a D8 series, 870, etc., etc. We want this, we want that. But then we live in a post-pandemic world with a shortage on pretty much everything, logistic nightmare, etc., etc. So you can't run both. But my question to the chat: would you buy D870 if Nikon releases one? So we have Sam who is monitoring the comments. He's going to make a little poll for you. So if you just guys vote and tell us what you think. Now, Becky is telling me that we are running a secondhand 10% off. So if you're thinking about secondhand D850, actually, we might have one. So do check out our website. And people do ask us about the heat. I've talked about it in an offline part. We thought we were going to be live, but actually I said there was a heat here. We survived 38 degrees in London. Yeah, that's a bit hot for us. We don't have air cons anywhere. Maybe it's time to start. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. I sold my D850. I'm kind of full on Z now. So partly because, we run a technology channel based on Nikon gear, and partly because I have started to kind of upgrade my lineup of lenses as well. So finally I have 24-70 2.8. I've got, which one? I'm looking for 14-24 now as well. I've got 51.8. I'm looking for 85 1.2 when it comes out, etc., etc. I just don't think that it's financially viable to run two systems together, especially research and development.
Yeah, and I'm keeping my D850 for a couple reasons. So I've shot some pinnacle images in my career that got me cover pages and things with that camera. I'm not going to get a lot of money for it. And honestly, I always keep the last of the previous generation. So I have my F6, my F100. I'm keeping the D850 because I want to have my optical. just if I ever want it, I got the optical, I got the F-mount lenses, why not? And now I got, 3 or 4 mirrorless bodies going on at once right now, plus other brand, I got the GFX 100, I got an Alpha 1 over here that I use for the Sony videos, but it's, I think people just have to understand, just because they aren't putting out a new doesn't mean it's just gone forever. Like, no, it's still in your hands. You still have it. Look, you can still use it. It's amazing. I'd rather than put resources into firmware updates. Like, don't all you people that are complaining about the Gen 2 firmware updates, where do you think the resources come from? You know what I mean? Like, it's all the same company, you know?
That's true. Well, Chad agrees with you because, people, 78% of the voters say that they're not going to buy the 870. 20% said yes. So it seems like that at least our viewership is kind of full on that system nowadays. I do agree with you. It's just, it's nice. Do you think that the 850 is basically the F6 of DSLRs?
Yeah, it's such a banger camera. It was such a. They really took the gloves off with that one and it really put them back up on a pedestal for Nikon at a time where people were wondering if DSLRs were even relevant at that point when Sony was pushing in this whole mirrorless hype system, right? But I'll say if they put out a D870 or D880 or whatever it is, I guarantee you that is just because they don't want to waste the investment of whatever R&D they had for 3 years in the DSLR pipeline, if they even put it out. It's not because they want to keep going with DSLR, I think. It's just R&D wrap up.
What do you think on the D850 versus Z9? If you're just looking at the sensor, is there any difference in image quality between the two? You're not talking autofocus at the moment.
I personally don't. Actually, I personally couldn't tell you. I think that I've never looked at a Z9 file and was like, oh, it doesn't look like a D850, and I haven't seen any file from a D850 that made me question it. I did think there was times where the Z7 sensor felt a little richer to me. However, I will say it doesn't feel like the electronic shutter has inhibited my dynamic range at all, which people are scared of because electronic shutter can take away some of, usually in most cases, limits your dynamic range more than a mechanical shutter would. But I haven't felt that. And I've been shooting in all situations. You guys can see videos for the last few months of me shooting in all situations. And every time I pick up that camera, I find another reason I like it. So the Z9 has just been one of those cameras that I'm really excited to have in my bag for a few years, and not the camera that I'm like, oh, I'm going to wait for the next one. You ever have that? Like, oh, this is good for now. Like, I don't want that in my head. So I'm pretty happy with that.
Optical viewfinder versus electronic viewfinder. What's your personal preference?
So my thoughts on the EVF versus OVF. First of all, EVF has come an extremely long way, like you wouldn't believe. If you looked at when Sony was putting out the only full-frame mirrorless system, those EVFs were nowhere near what we have right now, okay? But what I will say is if you are somebody that shoots in a studio like I do, where you're shooting theoretical light, flash that doesn't exist yet, optical viewfinder is a real joy to use in that situation where you're not worried about the light being too low for the EVF to look clean. You're not looking at light that you're not going to be shooting anyway. You're just working in the space of the room that you're in. It's really great. Other than that, of course, EVF gives you real-time ambient exposures, all of that focal point across the entire frame. That's a big deal. Things like that really go a long way. And ever since I've mapped this button to turning my flash on and off, when I'm out there in the street, I check my ambient light by holding it down. I see where I'm at, how I'm underexposing it, even though I look at the light meter anyway. And then I take my finger off of it, shoot, but also I can hold it down and shoot ambient shots. So I'll hold it down, open up a little bit to compensate for the underexposure, shoot, then close down a little bit, shoot with the strobe. So I get, in a matter of 5 minutes, what would have probably taken me 5 minutes just to adjust for. So I think that's a huge, I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, that's good. That's good, because I actually had time now to look through the comments. Thank you everyone for joining us today. So again, I've said it all. We went live, so I'm going to say it again. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thanks for putting out your questions. Again, don't forget to put QQQ. So there was a pinned comment before Becky said, someone said, I wish Nikon would release a rangefinder in Q2. I wish as well, but the dreams can be dreams, but unfortunately that's not going to happen, I'm afraid. Becky is in the chat as well. Hello, Becky. She is asking, hey, Becky, what's your Z lens wish list?
My Z lens wish list. So you guys are gonna hate me so much, and I don't care. Look, the way I the way I invest in my gear is lighting is priority to me, then lens, then body. Because the body, you kind of like, you just deal with the image quality at the end of the day and your interface. But if there isn't good lighting, it doesn't matter what lens you have. Like you're gonna be pulling tricks out of your bag just to make something happen. This 24-120 f4 is one of the best lenses ever. You have a minimum focusing distance of like this close at 120, so you can mimic a 2.8 look really easily by moving closer. So I haven't felt the need to get the 2.8s, right? I would be curious to shoot 1.2 in an Nikon system, the 85 1.2. I wouldn't mind seeing if they could do a 105 1.2. Would probably huge, but I'm curious if they could do it. As far as wish list, like what is available now, I'm waiting for Nikon to put out a stubby prime wide angle 2.8, like a 16 or a 14 that just fits in my bag, doesn't take up a lot of space, but gives me all that wide angle that I want when I need it. Because right now, if I got the 14 to 30 2.8, what is it, 14 to 24 2.8, it's like this big in my bag. I kind of don't need that. I'll say I'm actually pretty good with. I'm actually cool. I got the 105 macro, which is one of the best lenses ever, especially for portraits, which people sleep on. Check out my video on Adorama TV for that. And I think that they need to start putting out the 200 to 600 f4 for all the people that are waiting for that lens.
Yeah. Do you think we haven't seen enough of wildlife lenses already?
I think they need more versatile lenses, because once you put a 400 on,
cheaper,
you're stuck at 400. 800 lens, you're stuck at 800. So if you give a 2 to 600 f4, that gets these people who probably never got into larger lenses, because the price of the Z lenses is kind of lower than the F mount lenses if you look at them. People are going to start buying those lenses in more of a mass audience quantity than they did in the F mount. So I think that they need to start looking at some of that market. Look, they still got a ways to go with fleshing out the lens system, let's be honest, but every time they put one out, find one person that has found one Z lens that says this thing's garbage. They've never said anything bad about these lenses, and they're all breathing corrected. Like, oh, nobody talks about this. Like, they made their lenses ready for video, so did Canon, but like, you can't say that about all systems, especially in mirrorless. I'm telling you, like, the breathing correction is such a big deal. It's not even funny.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people talk about video, like Nikon doesn't do video, etc., but then Nikon creates a lens specifically designed for this type of work. So videographers will thank Nikon for that specifically. Before we continue, I just want to thank you, Marvel and Adrian. Thanks for your support. If I haven't seen someone or haven't acknowledged anyone, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm trying to do too many things. I'm not Becky. I am trying though. You mentioned one of those, like, for me, the worst Nikon Z lens is probably 24-50. That's the one I wasn't impressed at all. Played with it the other day. It's okay for the money, I guess, but it's not going to win any awards.
I'm going to say to Andre in the chat, who says the angry photographer doesn't like Z lenses. The angry photographer doesn't like to get off his armchair, so we don't even know if he shoots anything. I'm just going to say that lens was almost like they needed something to come out with for the Z5 to be a kit that was affordable. So are we talking about that same variable aperture lens? Is that what you're talking about? The 4, 3 or something like that? Yeah, I'm not a fan of that either, but they really were trying to put out an affordable lens for that camera to have a kit. That being said, if that's the fall point, is a junky kit lens, then so be it. Like, I'm totally fine. I'd rather that than having lenses like a 24-70 or 7200 that need updated versions when they should be pro generation lenses. You know what I mean? So that's
I see what you mean, exactly.
I wouldn't be surprised if Canon puts out a Gen 2 of their 7200, which is an external zoom. Usually 7200s are this big because they're internal zoom to stop any sort of filth getting inside the lens during shooting wildlife or sports. But the big deal is you can't put teleconverters on the Canon. You can on every other system. And if you can't put a teleconverter in a 7200, you kind of take away that attractiveness for a lot of wildlife people or people that need that reach. So I wouldn't be surprised if they put out a 7200 Mark II. That being said, the 7200 Mark that's out now is a great lens. It really is.
Here's the question for you, Seth. 51.2, 85 1.2. Are you the guy who's going to get the widest aperture, the biggest lens, the image quality is priority over the size weight guide, or you prefer to have a kind of a maybe a finer balance, maybe smaller size, maybe 1.4 aperture, etc., etc.? Would you go for the ultimate image quality? It doesn't matter the price and the size, over, let's say, a good compromise between the price and the size and the image quality?
That's an interesting question because I don't think I shoot the way a lot of people in this chat might shoot, where you're carrying a bag and going around. I'm usually going to sets. So to me, once I get to set, it doesn't matter. I'm lugging a ton of gear anyway. The shot lasts forever. What I did that day to get that shot doesn't. That's the way I look at and approach my work. And that's how I work as a pro. So, I mean, I was out with Joe and he had the 400 millimeter 2.8 and the thing was this big in the middle of Times Square. I'm in the rain with this thing for Joe. And honestly, in the end, you have to decide for yourself, would you carry the lens at all? Because then you're not shooting. So it doesn't matter how great the lens is if you don't carry it, which is what I said in the 400 millimeter video, which is why I think that lens is so great. You will carry that lens with you because it is compact. For me, I think the problem with a lot of lenses that are like 1.8 but not 1.2 is that they might only have like a single motor and aren't that fast compared to something that could focus faster for me when I'm working faster. So that's where I look at it more than the size of it. If it's ridiculous, yeah, I'm not going near it. I mean, why? If I can get something just a little closer to a shade of gray with the lens.
I see what you mean, yeah. But then, we talk about commercial photography, and then obviously you are a studio guy, you go on a set, it's either location set or a studio set. So you obviously will have a, couple of, trolleys with you, rolling like, cases, etc., etc. But then we have, let's keep hobbies for now. But then we have, let's say, people who shoot weddings or events, and then something like, let's say, if you have to carry 51.2 and maybe 85.1.2 and then 24-70 on top of this just to get the image quality, then it becomes a little bit heavy. So would you rather have, let's say, both options, or would you rather have, let's say, for me, let's say 1.8 is not an option. Like I need 1.4 in my life. I don't really need 1.2 personally, just based on its size. What would you say? Would you rather have two options, or would you just want them to go with 1.2 options and then you have 1.8 on the cheaper side?
I think what they need to do is have two options because not everybody is going to afford that 1.2. And if you want people to be in your system and enjoy the system that don't even understand what a 1.2 gives them, if it's $3,000 versus a $1,200 lens, you really need the $1,200 lens to sustain the brand and have people psyched to use it. And 1.8 or actually 1.4 to 1.2, most people aren't going to get the idea of that difference. Also keep in mind, a 1.2 lens will probably sell a few thousand in the world compared to something that's lower priced that will sell tens of thousands in the world. So just because it exists on the stock doesn't mean it can't exist. You know what I mean? Like it's not taking up resources because they're not making as many, I guess. That's the way I would look at it. I saw a question about flash sync.
Yeah, let's get to this. There's a couple of questions that we haven't answered, but while people are voting what 1.2 versus 1.4, I personally want them to think when they're voting for those apertures, it's each say 1.2 is better than 1.4, let's say, it's more shallow depth field, but think about the size and the price more than anything else. I was thinking the other day, we talk about expensive gear here. Yeah, we talk Z9 is $5,500 in UK, 400 to 800 mil. Those are all expensive items, right? And you think about it, like if if you're a professional photographer, it's a big expense because you need to make a living out of it. And obviously, we have a lot of enthusiasts who buy this equipment. And obviously, this hobby is, something that they're happy to invest to. But it is a lot of money when we talk about the things. And we have to think when we buy an equipment that sometimes we can't just buy, let's say, Z system, and we're going to buy Z9, we're going to buy 51, let's say 1.2, Trinity of the 2.8 glass, and we're suddenly looking at something like 12,000, 13,000 pounds. My question to you is more than anything else is what do you think? In terms of we have obviously people who are keen on this hobby as a photography, but it is an expensive hobby. Do we need to have both options open to all basically price levels? Because at this stage, something like 10 plus grand to enter in a new system, it's quite a lot to ask.
Absolutely. And you also have to look at where we are in this world, in this industry. The idea of the old pros like me, where we understand spending that kind of money, doesn't exist when you have a kid that's jumping right into producing for some small brands that doesn't have that money, will not get paid the money we used to get paid in like the early 2000s. And they are just looking to create. If you don't understand that the majority of people out there just want to create and don't look at, well, if I only had, no, they want to grab a camera. They're used to this and this quality. They're not really snobs about it, okay? What I would really urge you guys to realize is there is a generation, if not a shift completely of an audience that's going, we need to make it fast now with smaller kits that are more hybrid, more versatile, and more affordable. You can't think that a brand is going to sustain by only putting out pro gear. You guys do not realize that a flagship camera sells maybe 3% that of a mid-range camera. They probably will sell more D750s than they ever would a D850 or a D5, without a doubt. So you have to create these systems. Just because it exists and it's not for you doesn't mean, oh my God, this brand is lost and we can't, they're failing. Yeah. It's so immature. It's so narrow viewed, and it's very, it's not insightful. And I get that we are in this YouTube age of everybody having a voice, but everybody's at a different point of view from where they're standing. And look at the broader view, like the Z30. That camera had to exist. I don't care how many of you guys cry about it. And you can cry and then put in a vial and mail it to me so I can just go like this. Because I really just love that everyone hated on the Z30. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, we're thinking actually to shoot a lot of educational content with that 30, because I think that's going to bring a lot of people to our channel, because we want to expand. You know, we want to bring new people, because everyone's welcome, really. We want to have a community, not of snobs, but people welcoming each other and helping each other with, you know, with advice and other things. And in terms of this, I agree. Z30, I think, is a great camera. And I think, obviously, when things come out originally, maybe people think that the price is too high, maybe something else, but eventually give it 3 to 6 months, and I think it will find its own niche. And as you said, it's going to be in places like Targets and Costco's of the world. And in terms of this, it's going to sell a ton. And if it will help new people to create content, it could be a video content, it could be a photography content, doesn't matter. You can be creative with any tools that at your disposal. Before we wrap up with that now, I just want to thank Jeremy. I want to ask you 2 questions we had in the chat. So firmware wish list, and second one was the sync speeds that you meant to answer from the beginning.
We mean like, what do I want to see in firmware?
Yeah. I mean, did you like, for me, I mean, I think it's pretty good right now, personally.
So there's a bunch of stuff I want to see, and I bet you they can actually do what I want them to do.
That's why we have you on the show.
Number one, even though I have a button to kill the flash and show me my ambient light when I want it to show me my ambient light while I have a flash attached as I'm shooting, if I want to be in that headspace of like the ambient light look while I'm shooting. Right now, as soon as you activate a TTL strobe or trigger, it kills the ambient simulated exposure and just illuminates the whole thing. Really annoying to me. 2, I want to be able to change the color of the focus point overlays or give it a drop shadow or something, because not every situation I can see the points. Case in point, I shoot a lot of special effects makeup. You try finding a green focus point on a green alien. Doesn't exist. Or a light gray box when you're shooting on white concrete at a skate park. Can't find them. I don't know where they are. So that's another thing. The other thing I would really like to see is Canon has something called OVF simulation, and it makes their viewfinder a huge dynamic range. It makes it an HDR display, so it looks like glass. So if I'm in a studio, it'll look and feel like an OVF viewfinder to me, which is mind-blowing that they could do that. I would love to see Nikon do something like that, especially since the hardware is there. This has more nits than what Canon put out, and it can totally do it. And last, let's see if I can put this right. The focus point for the 3D tracking, I want to be able to customize not only the size of it, but I would like to make it so that the 3D box, the 3D tracking autofocus box will let me take away the priority of what's closer to the lens. So if I'm shooting someone's face and I don't have eye detect on, but I used a 3D box, I focus on their eye, if it sees the eyebrow here, it's closer than the eye. It doesn't know I'm looking for eyes. It just knows this is closer and it'll focus on the eyebrow rather than the eye. Let me take that priority away so I can shoot the way I want to shoot. Because no matter what features they give us, Nikon, Sony, Canon, Fuji, phase one, I don't care what you shoot, they never know your brain and what you're trying to do as a creative. They can only give you what they think you're going to want to use. So I want to have as much ability to fine tune how I want this to act, but let it be smart when I need it to be smart, you know?
Here's the follow-up question, Seth. You obviously have experience with other brands as well, and due to work for Odorama, you do try other brands as well. In terms of firmware or software in the camera on Z9, do you think it's on the level with other brands in terms of feature set that is available to you in camera?
Wait, say that again? I'm sorry.
Well, if you look at the current firmware 2.1 on Z9, yeah, so we've got obviously lots of video features now open, lots of customization open. Obviously, there's a few things that you want to add to this. That's obviously we're all going to wish for more customization available to us. But let's say if you look at in terms of like interface, in terms of what things you can adjust and change within the software of the camera, do you think in terms of its development, it's on par with other brands? It's on par with Canon feature, let's say Canon design interface of the software in camera, Sony and Fuji as well?
Absolutely, if not better. But this is a little subjective because what some people find intuitive, other people find crazy. So there's time and time people tell me that Nikon's menus are super intuitive. Then I'll give it to a guy that's been shooting Sony forever and they go, this makes no sense to me. And that makes sense because you're speaking a different language, right? What I will say, one thing that Nikon does probably better than anyone is their question mark button actually does tell you what it is in the camera in a coherent sentence. If you do that on another brand, they'll be like, this is nuclear fission mode. And then you click on it, goes, it does fission nuclear wise. Like, what does that even mean? So
I've been using this fish for at least 15 years.
Yeah, and Nikon never even marketed it. And then the Z5 came out, and I was like, at least in America, I gave them a whole thesis on why they're jerks for not showing people this question mark. Now look at the literature for the Z5, the Z30. They're really pushing that they have this question mark, which they've had for decades, and no one talks about it. So there's a lot of things that cameras do that you guys don't hear about only because certain YouTubers and review points only talk about the same certain things. But then remember when they trashed the Z series in the beginning? Well, how come it's sold anyway? How come we're at Gen 2? How come we're at the Z9? How come we have so many bodies? How come it's still selling? Because people got it in their hands and saw how it worked for them and made their decision. And that's what you need to do as a consumer, not listen to channels that are only in it for them, trying to get you to trust them so you'll hit like, buy their presets, buy their books, whatever,
I agree. Well, speaking of things that's coming up, we're in the second half of the year. What do you think is the next release from Nikon? Is it Z6 Mark III or Z7 or is it Z8 or is it a dedicated video camera?
I would pray, I'm not religious by the way, but I would pray that it would be a video-centric camera because they have no presence in the cine market. Being realistic though, it would probably be something closer to a mythical Z8, but I couldn't even speak to what that would be. I personally think the Z7 III should be their D850 replacement, their Z8. I don't think we need super high resolution full frame sensors because the second you start pushing that ISO past 800, you're going to have a big problem. You want breathability on that sensor, which is why I shoot the GFX 100 so much. I love that camera. That being said, they probably do a Z8. That's what I'll say.
Okay, well, Z8 comes out, and let's say it has let's say they're not going to use 60 megapixel sensor. Let's hope they're going to be a new generation. Let's say maybe 80 megapixels, because 60 megapixel Sony sensor has been around for quite some time now. So let's say it's a new 80 megapixel sensor. Would you trade in your GFX 100S towards that Z8?
Nope, never. What you guys have to see is the quality you get out of a larger sensor and the lens system that goes with it. And it's not just about megapixels and sensor size. Each camera has a trait to them. When we used to load our cameras with film, you were like Fuji Velvia for this, Kodak Gold for that. Well, when I pick up a camera, I think about what this camera gives me. I like the color accuracy of Nikon, but I love the rich grayscale I get out of that GFX 100. You know, sometimes I look at someone's skin tone and I go, this is a GFX 100 shoot, or sometimes I'll be like, nah, this will be a different camera today because I could see what's going to happen here. It's my headspace. It's not everyone's headspace, and I think you can't understand it till you shoot different brands. So what I urge you guys to do is, if you can, either rent different brands just to see what other camera companies are doing and how they process images, or go to your local camera shop, load in a card, shoot some images of your own hand at multiple brands, and then take that card home and look at it. Because you're looking at the same subject in the same light under different brand manufacturer processing, and you'll get an idea of what's going on there.
Absolutely. So I totally support this message. I agree. I think it's also opens up your mind a little bit. It's it's always good to love one brand, etc., but it's always good to keep open mind and also know what other brands do, what the color science is like, etc., etc. And obviously, GFX 100S is not the camera for sports and action photography. Obviously, what's focus is not going to be on the same level as Z9. But then, if you do that specific work, and obviously you do a lot of studio shoot or portraiture or location shoots, where you don't really need fast autofocus, but you also have a Z9. I mean, not many people can have two systems at the same time, but it's always worth to try. And at least have different experience so you know what to expect from other systems as well.
But it also gives you an idea of what you have in your hands that you're already invested into. When you start, so like, for example, we used to get a lot of rich people just buying pro photo lights as their first lighting kit, $4,000, not even thinking about it. Then they come in and be like complaining about something. And I'd be like, have you used anything else? And when they use something else, they go, oh, I see that there's an even bigger issue on this brand than this. Like, so you can't know until you've experienced. It's just like anything else. You need point of views, you need perspective. And that's why I think it's important to not get stuck in the systems and the brands, and get stuck in what you were trying to do as a creator and what system gives you what you're looking for, whether it's color rendition, speed of autofocus, size, weight, whatever. You got to look at it yourself.
Seth, tell us what Pro 40 gives you over Godox, because that's a very common question being asked on the internet. So you are the right person to answer that.
Let's open up a can of worms, shall we? All right.
Why not?
Godox, I appreciate Godox and Flashpoint, all these companies that have made lighting more accessible for people to get into the game. I'm not taking anything away from them. But when I have a shoot and I need Pantone colors on makeup to be color accurate, it to fire every single time, build quality that I never have to question, consistency, the exposure is always on, the TTL is beyond accurate, which you can actually see on my last live stream on my channel. I shot the TTL and it was beyond accurate on white paint, showing me detail. That aside, when you look at rental houses and they have certain brands in a rental house, they invested into that brand because they know it'll come back and able to be used again, rather than used a few times and they can't get their money back because it doesn't hold up. Color accuracy is a huge thing. Your light gets overheated, starts turning orange, green, different colors. You're not just going to be able to fix it in post when you have multiple lights that are shooting at different colors. And on top of all that, I don't edit. All the stuff you guys see from me, you even see me shoot it live, what I shot is what you guys get. So I'm not going to sit there and try to correct white balance on 3 different lights that didn't work right, or one that didn't fire or something. So dependability, consistency, peace of mind, and I make a living at this. So yeah, I invest into my gear so I don't have to worry about the gear. The gear should be a tool that I don't worry about. It should get me to my endpoint. I should worry about my endpoint. There's just a lot to it. A cohesive of a system. The actual whole system matches in color. The menus are all the same. There's no like adapters and junky weird stuff that I have to make things work together. Like I could go on forever about this. Check out my channel if you guys are interested. I have a lot of pro photo videos on my channel. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think, what I think Seth is trying to say is basically that, yes, when you're professional and you make a living with it, there's a lot less tolerance to the brand. So you stick to things that you like, that produce you consistent image quality. You get used to that, and it's a tool that you use. When you're just starting out, when you're a hobbyist, you're a lot more frivolous with what equipment you can use. And obviously you look at your budget more than anything else, because it's more of a, let's say, money that you spend for things to try, depending on what you want to do. When you're professional, you need everything to work. You don't want to waste your time on different things. You don't want to waste your time in the post as well, because because it's quite a busy lifestyle, and obviously you work professionally yourself. You shoot a lot for Adorama, so I'm sure you have a really busy schedule.
So I do want to talk about something that's happening in the chat right now. So one thing that I really wish Nikon would do, especially if there's like a Z9 Mark II. I know you guys think it's like it's handed down from the god, but I mean, look at what Leica just did, and stay with me on this. So Leica has a 60 megapixel sensor that when I downgrade the resolution, remaps the pixels, bins them together so that they're bigger, so that my noise goes down. If I change the resolution on my Z9, I still have the same noise that I would on a higher res image. So what I would like to see is seeing sensors that actually act like a 24 megapixel sensor when I set it to a 24 megapixels rather than a downgraded file that it spits out. Then
so what you're saying is basically a super sampling effectively, isn't it?
Is it super sampling? I guess so. It's pixel binning. So it would actually put together like, And I think it's going to be the next step in cameras is so I still carry a Z6 II in my bag because it takes up no space and it's a super good backup. But I also keep it there where if I'm out in the field and I just feel like the noise is like, am I shooting at night, like dead night? Sometimes that's a better option because I get a clearer rendition on a 24 megapixel sensor than I do on a 45 megapixel sensor. But what if my Z9 could do that? What if it could act like a 24 megapixel? I think it'd be really, I think that's the key is that Nikon's looking at the Z9 as let's get them to buy this camera and stick with our brand for the next 5 years with this camera rather than trying to constantly sell them the next camera, which is why you're seeing so many firmware updates.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for watching us today. If you haven't put a like, do click on that button as well. Speaking of 24 megapixel, Seth, is it still good enough in today's day and age? Obviously, a lot of people, when they're arguing about 24 megapixels, they're saying that a lot of content has been, the way the content has been shared nowadays, and so social media, it's all fairly low res. But for you personally, is 24 megapixels is good enough?
Yeah, I think you guys have to always look at what you're shooting based on where it's going to end up. And the reason shooting high res is such a privilege right now is really because when I shoot a full head to toe look for a client, I know they're going to take that image and punch into the bracelet, punch into the collar, the necklace, the makeup, and they're going to use some of that on their social, some of that on their website, some of that in an ad campaign. So going into a shoot like that, I want that resolution because when they crop in to 1/4 of the image, it's 24 megapixels at that point, right? If they're doing it on social, it's not such a big deal. So you kind of have to think, what do you really need out of the resolution that you're not getting? There's a lot of people that shoot like wildlife that love to crop like crazy, and I totally get that. And we all just like resolution. You know what it's like, man. It's like you fiend for the resolution. You just want to zoom in on the eye, and that's enough. That's all you need. Like you zoom in on the eye in the file, you zoom back out, and that was well worth the extra $2,000 for the higher res sensor. But 24 is totally usable, totally great, and honestly, 24 megapixels now is a higher fidelity 24 megapixels than we had in DSLR world. It really is a different look. You have to really look at these pixels to see the difference.
Yeah, and then some people going the other way and asking for the pixel shift, in the firmware built in onto the Nikon camera. So obviously, I think Fuji has pixel shift. Olympus had the pixel shift back in the day. Do you think we need that feature in Nikon cameras?
Just to stay on par with the other brands, sure. But I'll tell you this, I have never heard of it being implemented in a really great way. If you're shooting landscapes and the wind hits on that third frame or whatever, something shifts, something's out of place, it's not that great. I could see it for tabletop stuff, macro, super high end, or doing archiving, like museums use it in the Hasselblad system to document paintings and documents. They do the pixel shift for 400 megapixel renditions, but it's a special use case scenario. So I think let them iron out anything else that the mass majority needs, and then they can put in bells and whistles because they're gonna have to R&D that con. You know what I mean? It's gonna take a segment of engineers to do it for them. So I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, we just celebrated the 1 year of the Z6 Mark II firmware rumor with improvements of autofocus, so published last July. by certain website. I have a question for you. You mentioned R&D, how much time we're going to spend on one for firmware, etc., etc. Obviously, Nikon now is pushing Z9 firmware. Don't they have enough people to work on other cameras? Is it taking, let's say, 100 people? What do you think? Why we not really see firmware update for other cameras but Z9 at this moment? Obviously, my question is not on my personal opinion. It's more of a kind of a community feel about this.
I think you guys also have to realize what state the industry is in and how much smaller every company has gotten. Look at the last 3 years, minimum 5 years of articles out there, and find one brand that didn't close a facility, move facility, have massive layoffs, complete divisions gone, and we need to do our part to stop hurting this industry, honestly. The bashing of brands, the bashing of each other, the idea that there's only one right decision here hurts everybody. So I don't think you can underestimate what it takes to do firmware as far as lines of code, testing line of code, testing in every situation, running diagnostics, because look what happened with Canon. They put out firmware updates twice that I think bricked or something the R series, and they had to take it down really quick and try to do customer support. Now it's even more resources they need to put aside to fix a bad firmware. The worst thing a company can do is put out a bad firmware. I mean, you were taking someone's camera they already have and then making it faulty, and then the brand loyalty, the trust in it is just going. Is that your pup running around? That's so funny.
Yeah, she's around. She just woke up, so Tilly, come here. I agree with you. I mean, it's one of those things. It's a lot of things that we see online nowadays. I understand that is a frustration more than anything else, but at the same time, the world we live right now is a bit weird. I assume it's a new reality. I mean, we got 38 degrees in London in Celsius. That's ridiculous. Not talking about logistics and supply. Speaking of supply, Seth, so how's it going with all the brands and supply in the United States? Again, we're a Nikon branded channel, but I want to, because we concentrate on Nikon, people think that no stock is a Nikon's only problem. Is it the case, or other brands are struggling as well?
There is stock problems in every single point of manufacturing you can imagine right now. I mean, HDMI cables, which are common, hard times getting those cables right now. There is not only chip shortages, but being able to make the machines that make the products shortages. There is plastics and rubber shortages. There's import issues. There are still facilities that are at 35 or less capacity working right now. I mean, this is no joke what's happening. And don't forget, America's hitting a recession where people don't want to spend money. So think about having stock. Look at that pup. Look at that face.
Yes, I've kind of was putting treats everywhere, so hopefully she's going to come up, and here she is, finally.
Yeah, I think the people can't underestimate what it takes to get something from production to your hands and how long it actually takes. They don't just make it one day and ship it the next. It's such a huge process. And if they are trying to also do newer products, do you have an idea what 2 parallel lanes that takes for a brand to do it? I'm not trying to give corporations an easy time here, but it is a lot. I do want to talk about really quick. There's a bunch of people talking about the megapixel thing. 6 megapixels was enough for magazine covers. Yeah, during the time when 6 megapixels was acceptable for the printing that we had of those magazines that were disposable after 30 days. If you look at the printing on those magazines, they were rough. And also, you have to define what's acceptable for you, right? And also, don't forget, and this sounds horrible, and you guys can hate me for it, but sometimes you'll just get hired because of the quality of the gear you're using. I got guys here in New York that will pull out Hasselblads because they decided to pay them that extra $1,000 day rate, and they got to put on the show for the client and make them feel like they're getting something out of it. It's stupid. It still exists. I'm just saying.
That's true. I just want to thank Andrew and Andy and Wins as well. Wins says a professional uses the cheapest gear that keeps the client from leaving. The enthusiast uses the most expensive gear that keeps their spouse. Great stream. Thank you very much, Wins. I want to ask you about film as well. I know your answer is probably going to hurt me personally, but what do you think about the kind of renaissance of film nowadays? And we're not talking just for, let's say, enthusiast use, but also, film being used for fashion and, let's say, editorial lifestyle photography?
Well, I think first of all, a lot of people lean on film just because it's film. Like they don't make it like it doesn't. If that image was shot on digital, most people are like, but if it's on film, That aside, I love film. Look, it's tattooed all over me. Like I love film. Believe me, I have a memorial to Polaroid on my thigh tattooed on me. Okay, so I'm with you. What happens right now is people are getting into it because it's so different looking from what's out there. It's another thing that'll be like black mist filters and prisms in front of lenses. People will get tired of the trend and will move on from it. Because if there's no new cameras being produced from major brands to have a system to shoot film, is it really going to have a future when we're just recycling older cameras and holding on to them as much as we can? I would hope film stays around forever, but it is probably like $40 a roll when you're done being processed here in New York. And the speed, right? I don't know too many art directors that are okay with waiting a couple weeks right now. And if they are, it's because it's a special project and maybe only 0.5% of the pros have made it part of their repertoire, and they would be purposely hired to do film. And if they do, I guarantee you they shoot digital and film at the same time for the job. So I don't think it's going to be like gone forever, but I also don't think it's going to be like, hey, film's back, yay. Like I just don't.
That's true. Speaking of different things, like as you say, that are kind of periodic, and now we say, oh, film is in trend, etc. Speaking of other trends, like Andy mentions in the chat that says Dune was shot on digital, then projected on film, and that film was scanned again, made digitally. What do you think? It's happening more and more. I think last Batman was shot this way. I don't know if actually people will start to apply it to stills photography as well. What do you think about this trend?
I think it's a nice PR point. Like, look at Euphoria on HBO. They started making Kodachrome again, just for this, I think. And it was targeted at Gen Z kids that like shooting film, that want to see the film look, that gives them a different feel. It's a beautiful moment, but is it sustainable? And also keep in mind, OSHA regulations are getting worse and worse for the chemistry that's happened. Look at what happened to Velvia. Process Velvia now is a kind of a hard thing to do because the chemistry was deemed not good for the environment, right? I do also think that we're going to be looking at digital. Velvia is amazing. I have a whole fridge full of Velvia, believe me. And expose it at ISO 64. Oh, forget it. Anyway, I think that we're going to see digital processes get to a point where people aren't going to know or care. Remember when people said CGI was garbage? Now look at the Marvel franchise. Everything is selling in CGI. So you're just going to pick what you want as a project and find if someone will fund it, and then find if someone will buy it, and then that's what's going to happen. But as far as a global takeover of it, like, I don't see it. I just don't. I do. How do you think?
Sorry.
No, I keep saying there was a flash sync question in the chat that I never answered, and I'm sorry. If you have that question, sling it again. I will answer it. I'm so sorry. It was there before we even got live, so I want to answer it. But go for it.
That's true. That's true. Speaking of film, obviously, a lot of people mention the environmental impact, etc. And obviously, a lot of those chemicals has been changed over the years to become more, user friendly and basically just more friendly to the environment. Do you think we ever gonna get film that is not damaging anything and it's easy to produce? And we're talking about not just film itself, but let's say the processing chemicals, etc., etc.
I think they're going to have to develop new films that need less toxicity to develop. I mean, I've been poisoned twice in my life in darkrooms. One was in color darkrooms because they used formaldehyde and arsenic in the chemistry, and the other one was from selenium toner that got so bad in my hands, my elbows felt like they were about to snap, like my bones hurt. It's never going to be water, but it could be as easy as vinegars versus acids. And then what actually happens there? Do we need to make a film that just doesn't have a longer shelf life, that needs to be in lower production rates so that it can exist? So that's somebody else. I mean, look how hard it was for them to bring back Polaroid. Remember the Impossible Project?
The Impossible Project, yeah.
That was a hard thing for them to do. So, and also Fuji Instax peel apart. we all thought that was going to be around forever because everybody I knew used it. Then I took a step back.
FP100C, I think.
FP100C, 3000B, all that stuff. We all thought everyone was using it. You take a step back, it was this big of a market for just the pros that had the equipment to use it. And you just stuck in this tunnel vision of not realizing there's a giant world out there that has to sustain a brand, man. You know, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you summed it up really well with film. I think film, for me personally, it hurts like a lot of people, the engine of DSLR cycle. It hurts them personally because they use DSLRs. And I love film, I love shooting film, but I know that maybe at some point it's going to be over, but, I'm going to use it as much as I can. But you mentioned Instax. I think a lot of people don't pay enough respect to Instax range and what Fuji does with this point and shoot Instax cameras.
I mean, they've been putting out such cool little things left and right. I mean, this camera, if I was a kid and I just wanted to have a blast, every time I move this and every time I change this, it changes the look of the lens and the look of the color, and then it prints out, and then I have multiple copies and I'm handing them to people. I mean, they're killing it as far as camera culture and the romance of the photo nerd. Fuji really hits a tone with that like no other brand because they have the legacy. Sony doesn't have a legacy in the camera industry. They have the technology and the progression. Nikon put out the ZFC, sold like crazy, right? I think Nikon, if they put out a analog-ish looking rangefinder digital, they would, like the S series that they had years ago, they'd kill it. Mm-hmm. Canon needs to start acknowledging their retro cameras, but they haven't even looked at their stuff as if it's worth noting that they've been around for 100 years. Fuji, they're like, yeah, dude, we make mechanical stuff. Look at all these dials. It's like,
that's true. That's true. I mean, not to bash any brands, but yeah, I think we agree that let's say Nikon, Canon, and Fuji, they're more the traditional photographic companies, and obviously Sony is more kind of a new kid on the block in the way that they treat it in a modern way as a corporation. They live in the product cycles more than anything else. Obviously, they bought Minolta back in the day, and et cetera, et cetera. But the way the companies behave, like, you got the, Sony, Fuji, and Canon, sorry, not Sony, Nikon, Fuji, and Canon, they are more of a traditional photography brand. And Sony is it's a technology brand more than anything else for me.
I want to, Yamin in the chat said, like, he'll send me a vial of his Z30 shed tears. Really quickly about the Z30. Yamin. One, you guys have to realize that Nikon is not a household name to generations right now. The majority of kids right now are getting their father's old Sony, not their old Nikon Fs. They're not playing Nikon PlayStation. They're not printing their reports on Nikon printers like a Canon printer. They're not using, other appliances like Panasonic has or something like that. Nikon needs to make themselves accessible to a market that wants to get beyond the phone and understand that this brand exists and is trusted by a lot of people for a reason. The Z30 takes away the cost of what the EVF is. I'm never going to need EVF for something like this, but I can set it down, record to my YouTube, and I'm using Nikon. I can use my Z series lenses. You get a kid into the Z30, they start filming for the YouTube channel, starts taking off. What's the next lens they buy? A Canon RF mount? No, they're buying a Nikon Z mount lens and they're going forward. And when that camera starts seeing a price reduction around the holiday time, you're going to see a real interesting moment where Sony has their vlogging camera, which is a huge market for them. Canon has the M50 Mark II. The problem with that is it's its own mount. It's in its own world. They don't have an RF vlogging-centric camera. Nikon does now. Nikon is in that conversation. That is a big deal to getting back to a market that's bigger than just us nerds. Okay? And for guys like me that have to film myself while I'm working, why should I buy another system? Let me buy an easy to get Nikon camera that I can use what I got, set it up, and do what I'm doing. So you guys have to look beyond, like, it's not my Z8, right? It's not for you. Shut up. It's not all about you. Stop.
There's a whole new world out there. You just need to explore it, and be conscious about this. I think, like, it's good to love the brand, and we all love the brand, but blind loyalty is overrated in my opinion. We should know what other brands doing, what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. That brings a more leveled conversation instead of just having a console wars or bashing one brand over another one. There's no need for that. Well,
So,
Xbox versus PlayStation, isn't it? It's been there for what, 10 years, and you got Super Nintendo versus Sega Genesis back in the day. Remember that?
yep. Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I'm going to answer the flash sync question now. I think what they're basically asking me is about the flash sync on the Z9. It's about a 200th. However, what's really interesting with Pro Photo, more often than not, I can get away with 250th of a second. With Nikon strobes, I can get away with 250th of a second. Other brands, I cannot get away with 250th of a second. There's a black bar in my images. What I will say is the Sony Alpha 1 has a 400th of a second flash sync. Is that a big difference? My answer is 100% no. You were talking about situations where you want 1,000th, 3,000th of a second as your flash sync, so as your shutter speed to take down the ambient light. If I'm going above 250th, we're not just inching it above just to take down the ambient light. No, we are trying to murder the sunlight down. So no, it's not that big of a deal to me. High speed sync is getting better and better and better every generation. There's just big problems, in my opinion, with high-speed sync all the time, but we're kind of erasing those problems slowly. I can go into those problems if you guys want, but the reality is I'm shooting in sunlight with this, and I'm not going, oh man, if I only had 2/3 of a stop faster shutter. Never, never, never.
Here's the question for you, Seth, about lighting. So I've got my Elinchromes for last maybe 10 plus years. Yeah, so they're
Nice.
obviously, flash robes. I got two 500s and I think one 1000. So, they do the great job. 200 of a second sync speed. Yeah, don't go 250s on this, on all cameras, starting from the 800, etc. What's the new thing in lighting nowadays? Is it the high sync speed? Is there anything else? I know the LED lights, continuous lights have been developing quite well, but what's new and big nowadays in flash photography, in studio flash photography?
Well, what's funny is that strobe hasn't changed that much. It just tries to get more and more consistent and reliable, because if that strobe fails, whether it's exposure, whether it's color, whether it's not firing, it's become more and more reliable, becoming smaller, able to dissipate heat easier by being smaller, more efficient on battery power. We're seeing things smaller than speed lights with more power now, right? That's a bit like the A2. I had that before somewhere over here. I feel like I'm drunk with gear. It's just everywhere. The high-speed sync has changed the game, but it wasn't really refined. It's like how TTL wasn't really refined in the beginning. It was super all over the place. And now it's nice and reliable. But you're looking at lights this big that are more powerful than a speed light, smaller than a speed light. And you can check out my video on this on Adorama TV. Give it a like. But the reality is, when it comes to high-speed sync, there's a lot of misconceptions. And it's mainly because of the name. And actually, AJM is talking about it right now. He's high-speed sync pulses of light versus freezing flash at a 30,000th of a second. People think high-speed sync is meant to freeze action. It is not. In fact, what high-speed sync is, oh man, should I go through this whole explanation? So look, the way the focal plane shutter works is it opens and then it closes behind itself. At some point, your shutter gets so fast it doesn't open all the way and it already starts closing. So you have this little slit. If you are too fast, your flash only fires in between the slit and not the whole frame. So what high-speed sync does is allows you to stay in sync with a high-speed shutter to pulse pop, 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 and make it fill the frame. High-speed sync is referring to the speed of the shutter staying in sync with your flash, not I'm shooting sports or somebody doing a backflip and I'm going to have a faster flash. In fact, the flash duration of high-speed sync is longer than regular strobe. And that's because you need more power to be able to recycle fast enough for the pulsing. If you need more power, longer flash duration, more chance of you actually having blurred action. To then take that in a step further, that's when you start boosting up your shutter speed to 3,000, 5,000, 8,000th of a second to then mitigate that problem. So it's your shutter that's still freezing the action. It's just the flash that's actually able to keep up with the speed of that shutter. Now you also have things like leaf shutter, which close like this, which their flash sync is naturally like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 of a second.
Yeah, so you got Hasselblad's, yeah, the phase ones, and obviously the traditional Mamiya's back in the day, yeah.
And the Fuji X100 series has a
That's true. That's true. Which you have one, isn't it? Yeah.
I love that camera, but that camera's shutter is this big and doesn't need a lot of room to travel. But a Hasselblad, it's like this, and that length of travel only lets you get to a 500th of a second, maybe a 1,000th of a second, maybe. So that's the limitation of a leaf shutter. So the limitation of a focal plane is the flash sync. However, I will say that the first concern I had with the electronic shutter only in the Z9 was, would it be able to handle high-speed sync? I'm going to tell all of you in this chat, I have beat the absolute hell out of all my lights and this Z9 to a point where my Z9 is literally covered in blood. If it's going to focus, there it is. All right. It absolutely 100,000% works with high-speed sync without any sort of issue in any way, shape, or form. And Joe McNally always shoots in high-speed sync right now, so trust me.
Yeah, for some reason, Seth, I don't want to be your assistant.
Oh, no, I mean, I don't work well with others, so it's okay. I mean, but
that's true.
All the concerns with the rolling shutter that I've had with other cameras does not exist in the Z9. I don't have rolling shutter warping. I don't have any issues with it not firing my strobe. You know, like it's there. It's done. It's done. We're there.
Fantastic. All right, Seth, well, thanks for joining us today. It's been an hour. I think we had a great chat. I personally enjoyed it, and especially that was a great explanation of what high sync speed is. I think for a lot of us, there was a lot of confusion around that subject. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching us. Seth, where we can find you on the internet?
You can find me everywhere at Last X Witness. You can join me here on YouTube. I have a lot of videos on lighting. If that's your weak point, come join my channel. We shoot live. We go over lighting and all sorts of stuff. Instagram, check out some of my work. Join me on Twitter to complain about the world. And, find me everywhere under Last X Witness. And don't forget to join my Discord. So if you're at my YouTube channel, look in the description. It's a photo community where you can share work, troubleshoot things you're having problems with. A lot of Nikon people in there. I'm telling you, there's Nikon people in this chat from my community. That was an hour. I feel like we have like 10 more years of stuff to talk about.
Well, it's in a good company. Time flies, isn't it?
I know. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And this is a great channel. If you haven't subscribed to it, subscribe. They have a great demeanor about photography as a community, an art form, a discipline, and just an industry itself. So please hit subscribe and hit like on this video. Don't be one of those guys. It's free.
Doesn't cost you anything. Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, Seth. Appreciate it. Just a quick announcement for next week. We're going to take a short break. We're not going to have a live stream next week, but we will come back the week after. And the new podcast will be out on Wednesday as usual, so usual time. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Later.
Okay, I think.
Whoa.